What if I told you that one of the biggest stars in Hollywood has been keeping something hidden for 30 years? Not just a minor detail about his past, not just another wild tabloid rumor, but something far deeper. A truth that could completely change the way we see Johnny Depp, and maybe even the way we see Hollywood itself. It sounds dramatic, maybe even impossible, but stick with me here. Because by the time you reach the end of this story, you'll start piecing together all the little signs that were there all along. The hints in interviews, the strange choices in his career, the way he's always seemed half inside the Hollywood world but never truly part of it. And then you'll realize that if this secret really is what many believe it to be, Hollywood might never be the same again. Johnny Depp isn't just an actor. He's not just another celebrity who rose and fell with the tides of fame. He became a symbol, a cultural figure who carried entire generations with him. From teenagers who once plastered his posters on their bedroom walls during his 21 Jump Street years, to adults who watched him disappear into eccentric characters like Edward Scissorhands, to families who couldn't get enough of Captain Jack Sparrow. Johnny Depp became more than a star. He became an idea. The idea that Hollywood could produce someone who didn't play by the rules, who bent the system and still made it work. But while the world was busy being entertained, Johnny was busy carrying something heavy, something personal, something that explains why, even at the height of his career, he always seemed to be looking over his shoulder. Let's go back to the early days. The 1980s, a young Johnny Depp didn't even want to be an actor. He wanted to be a musician. He was playing in bands, chasing the dream of rock and roll. Acting came almost by accident, and even when it brought him money and fame, he often described himself as an outsider. He never wanted to be polished. He never wanted to be Hollywood's version of perfect. That's why even early on he started rejecting roles that could have made him the next Tom Cruise or Brad Pitt. He didn't want to be just another product. He wanted something different. But maybe it wasn't only about art. Maybe it was because more attention meant more chances for the truth to slip out. By the 1990s, Johnny was carving out a strange and fascinating career. Think about the characters he chose. Gilbert Grape, the tormented young man in a quiet town. Edward Scissorhands, the lonely outcast with blades for fingers. Ed Wood, the eccentric director who was seen as a failure but kept chasing his dream. These weren't safe roles. They didn't scream box office guarantee. But that's exactly what Johnny wanted. The spotlight, but on his own terms. And every time he played one of these unusual roles, he was sending a message. He was here, but he wasn't going to play Hollywood's game the way they expected. Now, here's where the whispers start. People close to him during this time have hinted at something deeper. That Johnny didn't just avoid mainstream stardom out of rebellion or eccentric taste. He avoided it because the more mainstream he became, the more vulnerable he'd be. Vulnerable to questions about the deals he turned down. Vulnerable to rumors about what he'd seen behind closed doors. Vulnerable to people asking why he seemed to know things about powerful figures that he wasn't supposed to know. By the early 2000s, Johnny was no longer just the quirky outsider. He had become a global star thanks to Disney's Pirates of the Caribbean. Captain Jack Sparrow wasn't just another character. He was a phenomenon. Children dressed like him, adults quoted him, and Disney made billions. Suddenly, Johnny Depp was the face of a franchise. But did you notice something? Even then, even when the whole world was celebrating him, Johnny always looked a little detached. Like he knew it wasn't fully real. Like he was playing a role not just on screen, but off-screen too. Why? Maybe because he was protecting that secret. A secret that insiders say could expose how Hollywood really works. The deals. The corruption. The reasons some actors rise while others vanish. The stories that get buried. The scandals that never see the light of day. Insiders whispered that Johnny knew too much. That over the years, he'd seen too many things he couldn't unsee. And so he built a shield around himself. He took strange roles, lived in faraway places, surrounded himself with outsiders like musicians and painters instead of Hollywood insiders. It wasn't just because he was eccentric. It was because the closer he stayed to Hollywood's heart, the closer he came to losing control of the truth he was protecting. And let's be real here. Johnny has always been a puzzle. How many times have we seen him vanish to a French village or escape to his private island? How many interviews has he dodged? How many red carpets has he skipped? Fame was never his addiction. In fact, it seemed like the more famous he became, the more he wanted to disappear. And when you think about it, that's unusual. Most stars cling to the spotlight with everything they have. But Johnny? He treated it like a curse. Doesn't that make you wonder why? Now let's talk about the interviews. In 1997, Johnny said something that almost everyone ignored. He said, "Hollywood is built on illusion. The moment you see past it, you realize nothing is what it seems." At the time, people just thought it was Johnny being philosophical, maybe a little cryptic. But looking back now, doesn't it sound like a warning? Almost like he was telling us the truth, but in a way that wouldn't get him in trouble. Even in recent years, during his very public court battles, eagle-eyed fans noticed something odd. Johnny was willing to answer embarrassing questions about his personal life, his addictions, his messy relationships. But when it came to bigger questions about studios, about business deals, about connections to powerful names, he always seemed to dodge them. Not angrily, not suspiciously, but carefully, as if one wrong word could open a door he wasn't ready to open. Now here's where it gets even more serious. Hollywood isn't the same as it was 30 years ago. The industry is in crisis, strikes, streaming wars, declining box offices. The system doesn't look invincible anymore. And in times of weakness, secrets become harder to keep. Which is why more and more insiders believe that Johnny's secret, the one he's been protecting since the 90s, might finally come out. Maybe through an interview, maybe in a memoir, maybe even by accident. But when it does, it won't just be about him. It will be about Hollywood as a whole. Imagine for a second that Johnny has been protecting evidence of how the industry really works. Why some actors rise while others fall. Why scandals erupt and then mysteriously vanish. Why certain names are untouchable no matter what they do. Imagine if he has proof or even just personal stories that show Hollywood isn't just about making movies. It's about power, about control, about keeping the public distracted while the real deals happen in shadows. If that came out, it wouldn't just embarrass a few people. It would tear the system apart. And here's the part that makes this so believable. Look back at Johnny's life. Not the surface-level Hollywood version, but the choices, the patterns, the strange moves that most people never stop to question. His reluctance to commit to mainstream blockbusters wasn't just about being quirky or independent. Sure, he always said he didn't want to be typecast, didn't want to be another cookie-cutter leading man. But maybe it was more than that. Maybe every time he turned down a safe, money-making role, it was a form of self-protection. Because with those roles came more attention, more interviews, more obligations to the system that controls Hollywood. And the closer he got to the center, the harder it would be to keep his distance from the truth he was hiding. Think about it. Most actors would kill for roles like Superman, Batman, or the next big Marvel hero. But Johnny? He passed on so many mainstream opportunities. He didn't chase the superhero craze. He didn't lock himself into decade-long studio contracts. Instead, he went for the offbeat, the strange, the roles nobody else wanted. Characters like the Mad Hatter, Willy Wonka, Sweeney Todd, roles that let him hide behind costumes, makeup, and eccentricities. Roles that kept him from having to live as Johnny Depp, Hollywood's golden boy. He was there, but also not there. In plain sight, but still hidden. Doesn't that sound like a man who knew he couldn't afford to be fully exposed? And then there's his choice to spend long periods away from Hollywood. Most stars live in Los Angeles, right? It's the beating heart of the entertainment world. That's where the meetings happen, the parties, the power deals. But not Johnny. For years he lived in France, tucked away in a quiet village with Vanessa Paradis and their children. Later, he escaped even further to his private island in the Bahamas. Think about that. How many Hollywood A-listers own entire islands, not just as luxury toys, but as hideouts? Johnny's distance wasn't about luxury, it was about survival. He built physical walls between himself and Hollywood, as if being on another continent or another island kept him safe from whatever was chasing him back in Los Angeles. It's almost like he knew the less time he spent in Hollywood, the less chance someone had to corner him, to pressure him, to drag him into something he couldn't get out of. He could fly in when he had to film. He could show up for premieres, but when it was over, he'd vanish. While others stayed, networking, partying, building connections, Johnny disappeared. Out of sight. out of reach, out of danger. Now let's look at his endless legal fights. On the surface, they looked like messy personal battles. Lawsuits about money, fights with ex-managers, high-profile trials about relationships. But if you zoom out, they start to look bigger than just personal drama. Every time Johnny went to court, more attention was drawn to him, more eyes were watching, more secrets risked spilling out. And yet, somehow, the fights always seemed to orbit around money, contracts, credibility, image. As if the personal side was a cover for something else entirely. Could it be that some of those battles weren't just about what was being reported in the headlines? Could it be that behind closed doors, those cases were about keeping certain things quiet? About protecting that 30-year-old truth? Legal battles are dangerous for celebrities. Courtrooms are places where secrets can leak, where documents can surface, where people can testify things you'd rather keep hidden. And yet Johnny has walked in and out of courtrooms for years, always surviving, always fighting, always managing to come out with his core story intact. How? Maybe because even when the chaos got personal, the real truth stayed buried. And maybe that wasn't luck. Maybe that was strategy. Then there's his escape into art and music. Johnny has always described himself as a musician first, an actor second. He's played guitar on stage with legends like Alice Cooper, Joe Perry, Marilyn Manson, Oasis, and so many others. He paints, he writes, he surrounds himself with creatives who don't care about Hollywood power games. Why? Because artists live differently. They don't dig into contracts. They don't chase tabloids. They don't care about scandals unless they're part of the art. Being with them, Johnny could breathe. Being in music, he could disappear into chords and lyrics instead of headlines and red carpets, and think about how different that is from other stars of his level. Most A-listers spend their downtime networking, building brands, investing in production companies, launching tequila lines or fashion labels. Johnny, he paints in quiet studios. He jams in hotel rooms with old rock stars. He surrounds himself with misfits, outsiders, rebels who don't answer to Hollywood. It's not just eccentricity, it's refuge. It's a man building walls around himself, not just with geography, but with culture. When you put all those pieces together, his rejection of mainstream blockbusters, his long absences from Hollywood, his constant courtroom battles, his retreat into music and art, it all starts to look different. It doesn't look like eccentricity anymore. It doesn't look like a man who simply marches to the beat of his own drum. It looks like survival. It looks like a man who knows too much. A man who has seen things we haven't. A man who has spent 30 years carefully walking the line between staying relevant and staying safe. Ask yourself this. Why would someone with everything, fame, money, power, choose to live as if he's always hiding? Why does he seem happiest not at the Oscars, not at premieres, but strumming a guitar on stage with a band, far away from flashing cameras? Why does he avoid the spotlight that most actors crave? It's because fame for him has never been the goal. It's been the risk. Every new role, every interview, every award increases the chances of exposure. And so he's had to live his life balancing on a knife's edge, stay visible enough to work, but invisible enough to survive. And isn't it ironic? The very thing that made him a legend, the unpredictability, the eccentric choices, the disappearing acts, might not be personality quirks at all. They might be the shield he's used for 30 years to keep something much bigger from coming to light. Something that, if exposed, could burn not just him, but the entire Hollywood system. Because here's the thing about Johnny Depp. Nothing about him has ever been simple. His life has always been layered, contradictory, full of shadows and masks. And when you start looking at it through this lens, when you see his choices not as random but as protective, you realize he might not just be an actor. He might be a survivor. A man who has been outsmarting the system for decades, not because he wanted to, but because he had no choice. And maybe that's the real secret. That all the chaos, all the eccentricity, all the mystery wasn't about building an image. It was about staying alive in a world where knowing too much can be the most dangerous role of all. But here's the question that matters now. How much longer can it stay hidden? With Hollywood weaker than ever, with the media no longer able to control every narrative, with fans hungrier than ever for the truth, the day may come when Johnny no longer has a choice. And when that day comes, it won't just be his career at stake. It will be the entire industry's carefully built illusion, so maybe Johnny has been waiting. Maybe he's been protecting this secret until the world was ready to hear it. Or maybe he's been trying to outlast the system, to survive long enough to finally speak without being destroyed. And maybe, just maybe, that moment is closer than any of us think. So what do you believe? Has Johnny Depp been carrying a 30-year secret that could destroy Hollywood? Or is it just another mystery in a career filled with them? Could one revelation from him really expose the truth behind the entire industry? Or would Hollywood find a way to bury it again? That's the conversation. That's the question only time will answer. And until then, we're left with the signs, the hints, the whispers that have followed Johnny for decades. We're left with a man who has lived inside Hollywood's fantasy world while never quite belonging to it. And maybe that's why so many of us are fascinated by him. Because deep down we know he's not just acting on screen. He's acting in real life too, protecting something bigger than himself. So next time you see Johnny Depp, whether it's in a movie, in an interview, or on a headline, remember this. There's more to the story than we're being told. There always has been. And when the truth finally comes out, Hollywood might never be the same.